Welcome back to the Unfiltered Political Lens Podcast. Today we're going to enter the third installment for this week, The Future of Power and How Modern System Technology and Human Behavior are Reshaping the Bureaucratic Corruption. Now this is episode 3 of the 3-part series and the final closing arguments of this subject. If part 1 revealed the structure and part 2 exposed the internal mechanics, then part 3 is about where all this is heading, because the bureaucratic corruption is not static. It evolves and it adapts to new technologies and new political environments and new forms of control. And in 2026 and beyond, the landscape is changing faster than at any point in modern history. The question is no longer just how corruption happens, it's how it is transformed. In a world driven by data automation, artificial intelligence, and increasing centralized systems of influence. One of the most significant shifts in the rise of digital governance today, bureaucrats are not just managing paperwork and policy, they are overseeing the vast digital infrastructures. These include databases of personal information, surveillance systems, and predictive analytics and algorithmic decision making tools. With this comes a new form of power and control over the data. The data determines who gets flagged and who gets investigated, who receives benefits and who doesn't. And unlike traditional decision making, which can often be traced back to a specific individual, algorithmic systems can obscure accountability. When a decision is made by a system, who is responsible? The programmer, the agency, or the official who approved its use? This introduces a new kind of bureaucratic opacity. In the past, the corruption might involve alternating a report, delaying an investigation. In the modern era, it could involve adjusting an algorithmic weighting certain variables differently, or prioritizing specific data points, inputs. These changes can have massive downstream effects, yet remain vitally invisible to the public. The concern here is not just intentional manipulation, but also the potential for a bias to be embedded within systems that are assumed to be neutral. Once again, the pattern repeats, and the power concentrated, oversight lagging, and complexity shielding the process for the scrutiny. Surveillance is another area where the future of the bureaucratic power is expanding rapidly, and the capabilities revealed during the Edward Snowden disclosures were already significant, but technology was advanced considerably since then. Governments now have access to more sophisticated tools in facial recognition, real time data tracking, and integrated intelligence platforms that can connect information across multiple sources. These tools can be incredibly effective in security and law enforcement, but they also are critical questions about limits and oversight. When the surveillance becomes more efficient and less visible, the potential for misuse increases, especially the systems governing it, and not equally advanced. And at the same time, the line between public and private power is becoming increasingly blurred. Technology companies and data firms and private contractors now play a major role in the supporting government operations. This creates a complex web of relationships where influence flows in multiple directions. The concept of regulatory capture discussed earlier takes on a new dimension in this environment. It's no longer just about regulatory becoming aligned with industries. It's about shared ecosystems where the public and private entities rely on each other for data infrastructure and expertise. This interconnectedness can make accountability more difficult as responsibility is distributed across multiple actors. The revolving door phenomenon is also evolving. In the past, it primarily involved movement between the government and traditional industries like finances or defense. Today, it is increasingly includes the technology sectors. Officials with access to sensitive data or regulatory authority may transition into roles within the companies that operate in those same spaces. This creates new forms of influence where decisions are made. Government can have long term implications for private sector opportunities. Again, this is not inherently corrupt, but it introduces incentives that can shape behavior in subtle ways. Another emerging factor is the role of artificial intelligence in decision making. AI systems are being used to analyze data and predict outcomes and assist in everything from resource allocation to law enforcement. While these systems can improve efficiency, they also introduce new risks. AI modes are only as good as the data they are trained on, and if that data reflects existing biases, those biases can be amplified. Moreover, the complexity of these systems excuse me, makes them difficult to audit, and this creates a situation where the decisions may be influenced by process that even the experts struggle to fully understand. And in such an environment, the accountability becomes a significant challenge. Now, let's move beyond technology. There is also a psychological dimension to consider. The bureaucratic corruption is not just about the systems, it is about the people in those systems. Over the time, the individuals adapt to their environment and they learn what behaviors are rewarded, what risks are tolerated, and that actions are discouraged. Now, in high pressure environments where outcomes matter and scrutiny is constant, there can be a tendency to justify questionable decisions as necessary or pragmatic. This is often referred to as ethical drift, where small compromises accumulate until they become normalized. And the danger is not just in the initial decision, but in the gradual erosion of standards. Group dynamics play a role as well. Bureaucracies, there is often a strong emphasis on cohesion and loyalty. While this can strengthen the teamwork, it can also discourage the dissent. And when individuals see others engaging in questionable behavior without consequences, they may be less likely to speak out. Over time, this can create a culture where the silence is the default, and accountability becomes reactive rather than, proactive. This is one of the reasons why whistleblowers remain so critical, and they disrupt that silence and bring hidden issues to light, often at a significant personal cost. And the sexual misconduct and the power-based exploitation discussed earlier that also evolves within modern systems. The technology can both expose and conceal these behaviors. The digital communication creates records that can serve as evidence, but it also introduces new channels for misconduct. And at the same time, the remote work and the decentralized structures can make oversight more difficult. The underlying issue, however, remains the same. Power imbalance, as long as a hierarchical control exists, there will be a risk that it can be abused in person or in personal as well as professional ways. And one of the most important questions moving forward is how oversight systems do it. Will adapt? How will they adapt? The traditional oversight mechanisms, inspectors general, congressional hearings, and judicial review, they were all designed for a different era, and they are still essential, but they are not to be sufficient to address the complexities of modern bureaucracies, modern bureaucratic systems. For example, auditing an algorithm requires different expertise than auditing a financial report. Monitoring digital surveillance requires different tools than reviewing physical records. And if oversight does not evolve alongside the systems it is meant to monitor, the gaps will emerge. Transparency will also need to be redefined. In the past, the transparency often meant access to documents or records. In a digital environment, it may need to include access to code data sets and systems like the architectures This will raise its own challenges, including the security concerns as well as the risks of exposing sensitive information. Balancing the transparency with protection will be one of the key tensions in the years ahead. Now, despite these challenges, there are also opportunities, and technology can enhance the accountability just as easily as it can obscure it. The digital records can create audit trails, making it easier to trace decisions and identifying irregularities. But the data analytics can be used to detect patterns of misconduct, flagging anomalies that might otherwise go unnoticed. Whistleblowers can also leverage digital platforms to share information more widely and more quickly. The same tools that create risk can also be used to mitigate it, and they are implemented, if they're implemented thoroughly. But looking ahead, the future of bureaucratic corruption will likely be defined by a combination of old patterns and new dynamics. The core elements, power, incentive, and oversight, will remain the same, but the ways in which they interact will become more complex. The corruption may become less visible and more technical and harder to prove. At the same time, the potential impact of individual decisions may increase as the systems become more interconnected and more influential. The ultimate challenge is not to eliminate corruption entirely. That is unlikely in any system, but to the structures that are resilient enough to detect, contain, and correct it. It requires continuous adaptation, not just in policy, excuse me, but in culture. It requires recognizing that the systems are only as strong as the people who operate them, and the integrity is not fixed trait. It is a practice that must be reinforced over time. And in the end, the story of bureaucratic corruption is not just about failure, it is about tension. The tension between power and accountability, between efficiency and transparency, between innovation and oversight. As the world changes, that tension will not disappear, it'll simply take a new form. And understanding those forms before they become a problem is what will determine whether institutions remain effective, trustworthy, and aligned with the public they are meant to serve. I want to thank you once again for tuning in to the third and final episode of the Unfiltered Political Lens Podcast. I want to thank you for being with me over the last 3 days and concluding this chapter of discussion. Peace. We'll see you next time.